My name is Martin Hickerton. Welcome to this Resilient Lincolnshire webinar. My name is Martin Hickerton. I'm an Associate Professor at the Lincoln International Business School and also the Director of the MBA programmes. And I'm here today to talk to you about the concept of change and how change itself is changing at the moment. This online platform of Resilient Lincolnshire has been up and running for a couple of weeks now. It's proving to be a really good way for us to connect and collaborate despite the lockdown. So I hope you'll continue to join us as we continue on this series. But first, a little bit about myself. I actually used to work in the private sector in industry, and for many years spent my time helping unemployed people back to work as an operations manager. And I had a fantastic time doing that. Over the many years of working with unemployed people, I really got to see change and how change impacts people in a positive and a negative way. So people who have been in work for many years and then lose their jobs, they lose their skills often, they would often lose their sense of identity, and restoring those people back to work became a really interesting thing to watch and very fulfilling. And more latterly, I work with prisoners in the Ministry of Justice programmes and people on employment programmes through rehabilitation. And again, it was just really interesting to see change at hand. Now, more recently, and now I'm based at the business school and delighted to be at the University of Lincoln. And we regularly work with businesses across the country and internationally to talk about leadership and to talk about change. But of course, we're in a very strange situation at the minute. And I've just got this feeling that traditional change management may actually be really under stress as a concept at the moment. So what I wanted to do today was take you through a few ideas and share some thoughts I've got on this and thoughts I've been generating at the business school. As we go through, please do post your comments on the Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube sites. I'll hopefully be picking them up as we go through, and moderating the background is my colleague Kat. Thank you, Kat, for your assistance, and she'll be popping up a couple of questions as well. Would really encourage you to engage where you can. So the content for today, I'm going to present for around about half an hour, and then I'll take any feedback or thoughts. But we're going to cover principally three things. Why change management isn't working in the traditional forms in which we've seen it. Secondly, what hasn't changed? So despite all the tumultuous change, what's still the same? And I'd like to introduce you to an idea that has been bubbling away called the change spectrum. And I'll explain that when we get to it as we go through this journey together. And I'm quoting a friend of mine here, Lou, who we communicated early in the lockdown, and we were talking about the fact that outside springtime was absolutely amazing. It was like this beautiful weather. Here we were, and yet every so often things just felt awful for no reason, or probably there was a tangible reason at times and not at others. And there's a quote from America: the quarantine state of mind is having 3 solid days where you feel pretty well adjusted, followed by a sudden unexpected dip into what we call the hell zone. And we just laughed about it and thought, you know, we see that for ourselves, we see that for others. All the time, things seem to change, move, shift. It's a massive change we're in. And actually, this change is really complicated. It's too big. No change theory has been written within a pandemic at the end of the day. And it's so hard to see where we are now, let alone where we're going. So the purpose of today is to provide some food for thought. I'd like to start it from a personal perspective, my own and other people's I've been speaking to, and take this through to a business perspective. And I'd really like to connect with people. I'd like you to collaborate with this. And this is around developing resilience in Lincolnshire. But resilience in Lincolnshire starts with resilience in the organisations we are part of, and resilience of the individuals that we are. And so that's the purpose of today. So please do jump in, and I can see some comments coming through already, which is great. Thank you. So why change management isn't working? Bluntly speaking, it's way more complicated than it has been before, and it's not easily segmented. So I'm going to cast my mind back now to what seems like 1997, but I think it was actually only February. And I was able to do some work with the Environment Agency leadership group across the region. They've been in the business school, and we had a big day at Stoke Rochford Hall, which was fabulous. And can you imagine this? There was 60 people together in one room. I know, the heady days when we could have people together. And we looked at change management, and we looked at the traditional theories. I'm going to unpack a few of those now. And I think even over the last month or two, some of them you can really see why traditional change management is maybe not working. Kurt Lewin's model from the 1950s is often rolled out. It's one of the seminal works. Lewin talked about force field analysis. He also talks about unfreezing change. So unfreeze your organization, then make your change, and then refreeze it. But immediately I'm starting to think there's an issue with looking at things in this linear way. It almost implies that we're in a normal situation, moving for a change to another normal situation. And is this actually the case? It clearly isn't at the moment. And then Lewin talked about the things that need to happen to get change. You need support. You need to create the need to change, communicate often, dispel rumors, empower people. And then freezing is anchor the change, providing support. Already you can start to see that this linear approach perhaps isn't relevant when we're dealing with absolute chaos and tumultuous times that many people and businesses are today. It's not just one change we're dealing with, it's multiple changes. Another model we've looked at a lot through the business school is Grint's model, coming out from Warwick Business School a few years ago. And he categorizes and segments problems and therefore responses to those problems in three separate ways. And they're defined by how uncertain the change is or the situation is and the requirement for collaboration. Now, clearly, some problems, he calls them tame, require a bit of collaboration and they are relatively uncertain. For example, you need to recruit 10 apprentices in the autumn time. It's uncertain you'll definitely do it and you will need other people to help you, but it's doable. It's got an end point. There are, however, things that happen that are crisis. It's fairly certain you don't need a lot of collaboration. Quick, the building's on fire. How should we run out the building? You have to do it in an orderly fashion. You're directed to do so. So actually, what we need to look at is different ways of approaching these different solutions. And in changes, you have different ways of approaching these different solutions. Grint went further and said there's actually something called a wicked problem or a wicked change. And a wicked change is something which is very uncertain, requires a lot of collaboration, and you can't just work on it on your own. And it's these sort of changes which he says require leadership skills, tame probably more management skills, and crisis is more command and control. So you've got this segmentation of issues. Just to cast my mind back a little bit to the Environment Agency example I gave, I very cleverly, I thought up some real life examples that you could use. So number one, upgrading the staff toilets. Well, clearly that's a very tame problem. You might need some collaboration, but you can make that happen. There's an end point. Number two, however, improving customer satisfaction, a fairly wicked problem. If you want to make changes, you're not necessarily ever going to get 10 out of 10, but what you can do is move forward, and it's important to do so. And yet you get things again that are crisis. East Coast flood warning near Mablethorpe, for example, you might need to commandeer a Chinook at short notice and get over there, which indeed those amazing people at the Environment Agency did last summer. And so you've got these different areas, and we talked through what's crisis, what's tame, what's wicked. However, let's consider the current coronavirus crisis we find ourselves in. Grint said a wicked problem is more complex rather than just complicated. That is, it cannot be removed from its environment, solved and returned without affecting the environment. Moreover, there's no clear relationship between cause and effect. Such problems are often intractable. Now, isn't this interesting? Because where are we at the moment? It's almost as if we're in a mega change. It's a change event, it's epoch defining. It's not one thing. If you look at Grint's model, you try and segment the coronavirus response that a business needs to take. It's simultaneously a crisis, a wicked problem and a wicked crisis and a wicked change to manage. And it throws up a huge amount of tame problems by the side. So we see point one, change management has become a lot more difficult because it's not linear and it's not just one event. Second thing to consider, I think traditional change management has often focused on top down, you're the leader, what can you make happen? And Lewin's theory is in that sort of zone as well. But we have to recognise that leaders aren't driving this change, not locally, and no one in the world really can make the virus respond to them, no matter how much some politicians would like it to. Let's take an example again, John Cotter's amazing work, the 8 steps to change. And this is really useful stuff. We use this quite regularly. And I was chatting to a friend of mine, Paul, who's a deputy director at University of Nottingham. And he was saying, do you know what, at this time of year, ordinarily, we'd be bringing together the team. We'd be talking about our future vision, but it's so much harder to do. So Cotter says, create a sense of urgency, pull together your guiding team, develop the change vision and strategy. You can already see why this is going to be challenged. And his remaining steps is finishing up with, don't let up and create a new culture. Well, the leader here in the coronavirus world is not actually leading. We don't exactly know where we're going to be next. And for that reason, it becomes incredibly difficult to know how to lead through. And it's confusing. We see that across the board. The third point of why change management, traditional change management, isn't working is that I believe analysis has just got a lot harder. If we consider the change curve itself, you'll see on here it's adapted from the Kubler-Ross grief cycle and has increasingly been used in change management. Have people who go through stages of denial. And I think we've all probably been there with the coronavirus where we thought, is it that big a thing? Is this a bit overkill? And then almost horror when we see other people who aren't taking it seriously and they're not taking it on board. It can go through to anger, where people cast our mind back to pub chief executives or airline executives saying, this is just absolutely, crazy. This isn't going to work for us. We're going to go out of business. And that leads down to confusion. When will this end? What day even is it? What month is it? I think it's May at the minute, but no one's entirely sure. It's like that weird period between Christmas and New Year. Do I need to put trousers on for a Zoom call, perhaps? All of these confusing things which come out. But aside from that flippant aside, it can lead and does lead to a change curve, we say, into depression and crisis mode. So you've got all of these conflicting emotions happening. And the change curve would dictate that over time, people would move psychologically into a period of acceptance and new confidence. And my goodness, we hope that is the case. And our Beyond Boundaries series looks at the curve more broadly speaking. But my feeling is it's more of a macro level model. It will work well in hindsight, but in the day-to-day, when we're all incredibly stretched, does it work? I'm not so sure it does. In fact, there's this period here, which the hell zone, or call it what you will, it's almost like a tumble dryer where people are going round and round in this place. And they're going from near acceptance back into confusion and depression. We popped a question up on the board. If you find that that's related to experiences, the change curve more broadly so far, or have you seen in other people around you that they're kind of going around in the change curve at the moment? It'll be interesting to know if that has been the case. It certainly seems to be anecdotally what's happening there. Change Management 101, very much linked to business planning, says, where are you now? On a very simple level, where do you want to get to? And then thirdly, how will you get there? So analysis just got a lot harder because it's very hard to say where we are now. It's hard to see it. Where do we want to get to is also very difficult because actually we can't see the future and there's these mega changes continue to keep coming through. And then we'll need to look at how we get there, how we get to where we're going. So it's very difficult, change management. And just to illustrate this, I was at an HR forum just before lockdown, and they asked us to rate different aspects of our work-life balance. And you may have seen these in magazines as well. And it says, rate your current health on a 1 to 7, rate your friendship on 1 to 10, etc. Or let's see how it progresses over time in a longitudinal study. How are things progressing? But it just, again, it strikes us that actually, is it possible to look at things in such a binary way when we've got such incredible challenges ahead of us? And is it possible that we can even begin to explain emotions on a day-to-day basis when everything's being affected? Businesses likewise, traditional analysis, the SWOT, the good old-fashioned SWOT, your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, your threats. The threats are so massive at the moment, it seems to send everything else awash. What was a strength 2 months ago may now be furloughed and sitting at home if it's a key person for your business. Times are changing. Even if you look at the traditional PESTLE analysis, so your political factors, your economic factors, there's so many things at play, so many of them unknown, it's very hard to undertake that traditional analysis. This is a text I sent, a series of texts I sent to my friend John, actually, who's a teacher. And we were reflecting on these unprecedented times and the unprecedented use of the words unprecedented. And a few of the things that we're saying is like, there's no nursery to look after children. There's no school for kids, maybe, and that became true. There's no pubs. Oh, there's no park run on a Saturday. There's no church on a Sunday. There's no choir. My daughter sings virtually every day in the cathedral choir. There's no clubs for anyone to go to. There's no grandparents, which is really difficult to deal with for a number of reasons. There's no senior mates at the minute. There's no university working until September. Or that's what we thought at the time. And apart from that, situation normal. Because it just shows that all of these multi-strand pillars of our lives have been knocked aside. They're just not there overnight, with the lockdown suddenly coming in due to this unseen virus and this change. We've all had to change fundamentally overnight. We were leading that change. We were setting a vision for that change, and it's not been a linear change. In fact, the way I'm starting to think of it is we've got many change curves kicking off simultaneously. So you've got your family change curve, you've got your work change curve, your health change curve, you've got your physical change curve, you've got your lifestyle change curve, etc. Some of these will be further ahead than others. Some of these will be impacting on others. Some of these will be further down the line. Some will be further back down the line. And actually, what this creates is a sense of chaos, change chaos. And it's almost as if you forgive me for being a little bit scientific, and I'm not a scientist at all, but it's almost like Newtonian mechanics, like the simple, this happens and it has this effect of change, which now needs to go into a more of a quantum theory as to what's happening in the chaos, what do we see on a day-to-day, on a micro level, if we're going to make any sense of it at the moment. And I think this is true not only for our personal situations, but also for businesses, where everything in a business, every single aspect of a business has been impacted. It's like seeing ripples on a pond. When you throw a handful of pebbles in, you're not quite sure which one came from where. So we talked about where we are now, where we want to get to, and how we get there. And it leaves us in a conundrum. If traditional change management theory doesn't quite give us the tools we need, what do we do? Well, before we go into some solutions, I wanted to just pose some thoughts on what hasn't changed, because clearly the world is still moving on. And the first one is VUCA. Now, you may not have come across the term VUCA before, but you'll probably recognize what it means. I first heard it. My colleague Ruchi Agarwal, the Business Development Director, talks about this and talks about it at a Libs Connect event that I attended 3 years ago when I was moving across. And VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. All of those aspects of work which we know to be true. Things change, things are unstable, there's multiple cause and effect factors. Now, this has been around as a concept for 10, 20 years now. This is not new. Volatility in terms of connected customers, technology, increasing global competition, etc. Isn't it fascinating that we've been living in a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world? We've been living in a VUCA world for some time. Has that changed? It hasn't changed. We're still in a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. It's just the makeup of it has changed. And it's been a massive change all in one way. Interestingly, Ruchi presents these slides, and I've been very happy to pay homage to it here. It's the World Economic Forum survey on key skills. In 2015, the key skills required in a VUCA world: complex problem solving, coordinating with others, people management, critical thinking, all good things. And as they brought this up to speed for 2020, just before the virus hit, complex problem solving still being very high up the tree, alongside people management, critical thinking. Now, what I'm reflecting on here is that skills and traits within the VUCA world are still vital. I know from Lincolnshire businesses and the university itself that we've got so many people who have these skills, and it's really important to hold on to that, because no matter what is changing around you, you do not change. Your own traits, your purpose, the way in which you operate is just as important as ever it was. I think we need to hold on to that thought as we progress through. What else hasn't changed? Well, what hasn't changed is that perspective is absolutely key. A little diagram, the little cartoon there of two people. One says it's a 6, one says it's a 9. It absolutely depends on where you're sitting as to what you see. When we used to run our workshops face-to-face in those good old days, we used to throw out examples to people. And we used to say, can you give us an example of a good change? And can you give us an example of a bad change? You know, in discussing small groups, what's the difference? Well, spoiler alert, it generally comes down to whether it impacted on that person in a positive or a negative way. Was it a good thing for them or was it a bad thing for them? Because if it impacted them in a good way, then actually they would often perceive that it was a good change, and vice versa. So people say the best thing was I got a promotion because it gave me a pay rise, I got into a new role, I was able to exert new leadership skills, which is all fantastic. The worst change, the office moved, I couldn't go with it, I couldn't relocate. And you can see how perspective, rather than the change itself, which is just situations moving, is something that they need to focus on. And we've got this lovely quote which sits on my mother-in-law's mantelpiece regularly. Julian of Norwich: all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And isn't it interesting that perspective not only varies between person to person, but within us, it can also vary over time. And sometimes, to quote that great poet John Lennon, well, it's certainly attributed to him quite often anyway, I think he requoted it, but everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. And again, our perspective often sets whether we think a change is good. And I have this feeling that this change period we're going through is going to be absolutely extended. We know it will be. We know we may not hit the end point of it. And so how can we be okay in the situation we're in? Also, critically, for leaders and people who work in organizations, whether that's church, a business, or anything else, that idea of collaboration, listening, connecting with others to understand their perspective, it's more important than ever. So that's something else which hasn't changed. And my final point around what hasn't changed is that change brings risk and change brings opportunity, and always has. So there'll be some people, we've seen some brilliant examples of resilient businesses who've popped up very quickly with new ways to deliver to market. So the Rising Cafe in Lincoln delivering afternoon teas, for example. Other businesses maybe have just been through a very difficult situation and have not found that opportunity. They've seen great risk. I was reading Rory Underwood's blog the other day, and Rory's a collaborator with the business school, and he talked about this on his blog. It's a really interesting point of, if you just focus on the risk and don't look for opportunity, you can get really stuck. So if you look at the length of time that the FTSE market, for example, the stock market, has been in a bear market, as in on a decline, as compared to on a bull market when it's been rising, it's vastly smaller. Most of the time there's opportunities, but risk weighs so heavily on our minds, doesn't it? And it becomes one of those things. But you have to be aware that change brings risk and opportunity, and that hasn't changed. So what does this all mean? What does it all mean for us in the current day 2020? I think there's some really interesting ways we could start to look at change, and I'm going to propose a 3A's model. I'm really interested in your thoughts. If you agree with this or disagree, it's building up over time, and it's something which I'm hoping we can link into further workshops and action planning. And the 3A's are: analyze mindfully, accept the facts, and adopt AI. Now, that's not robots, it's not artificial intelligence in this instance. It's appreciative inquiry. It's looking for positives and strengths, and I'll explain that as we go through. But these are things that we have to do, because I'll give an example of the university. We moved to online teaching within about a week, 2 weeks, whereas been looking at things for some time. We've had to move with such speed. It's created risks and opportunities, but where do we go now? What do we do? But let's take it that to a personal level and think about analysing. And having spoken about the fact that analysis has got a lot tougher, let's have a think about what we could do. So I was thinking about the rainbow. I was thinking about the image that really stands out through the COVID-19 times, the rainbow of hope, the rainbow of thanks for the NHS and all key workers. And we have two in our window at home. I'm sure many of you do as well. And I was thinking about the rainbow and the fact that it's a spectrum. It is not steps, it's a spectrum. And a spectrum, I've written it down as a definition because I wanted to check my thinking on this. A spectrum is a condition that is not limited to a specific set of values, but can vary without steps across a continuum. And I thought, you know what, that's very similar to how people, I think, are seeing change today. So, for example, you could have the blue of the rainbow and the red of the rainbow in this text down here. You don't have to have all the steps of green, yellow, orange in between. On a spectrum, you can be in a number of places simultaneously. You don't need to be going through every single one in order. Again, I think this is something which we're seeing around us. And so I'm proposing, I'm looking at things a bit more as a change spectrum. And you can do this as well. If you'd be interested, all you need is a big piece of paper, a spreadsheet if you're technically minded, or a wall if you're particularly bored in lockdown, you can just scribble away. But effectively, the change spectrum goes from the most negative things that are happening in your situation through to the most positive. The idea being that actually at any one time, unlike a linear change model, you might be at multiple places at the same time. And I'd be interested to know if that rings true for people. In fact, I think we're going to pose a question in a moment, which is around about if you have had that experience of having positive and negative things within the same area, it'll be interesting to know if that rings true. Let me play this out with some examples now. I've color coded this, so red obviously being most negative through to green being the most positive. I think there's such a wide range it's worth thinking through. Now, clearly, and I didn't want to be in any way flippant about this. I know it's a life and death situation that we're in. Bereavement is something which some people will be dealing with, and it's probably not the place for a change management webinar to go into details, but I wanted to indicate you've got the most negative areas. You've got dealing with illness, mental health, suffering, stress, anxiety, financial worries, people are worried about furlough, redundancy down the line, no contact with the extended family. And yet, within this situation, we also have positive things happening. We have more time with our immediate family. We have reduced spend in general in many instances, daily exercise, chance to reset our lifestyles. There's new technology, and there's feeling refreshed for many people. And isn't it interesting that actually how we've got to the situation where people can be in a number of places simultaneously? You could be absolutely worried about your financial situation, but better off financially. And there's this sense of there's a mirror within the spectrum, which we're all seeing at the minute. You may be really anxious about certain elements, but feeling really refreshed about others. It just strikes me that the chaotic nature of change today leads us to the situation where we maybe need to look at things in a slightly more granular fashion, to use that word. The spectrum, if you think about this, if you're going to do this yourself, you'll recognize it's very individual to you. It's very different from other people. And the phrase that we're all in the same boat, I don't think it has ever been less true. We may be in the same storm, to quote the meme, but you're not in the same boat because you'll be living in a different situation with different family circumstances and different health and different people around you, different work, etc. It's not linear. You don't have to go through each of the steps to go from most negative to most positive, and it can be conflicting. Thank you, Stuart. That's a really good point Stuart's made. 16-year-olds not having to take GCSEs. Obviously, that is in some ways a massive relief, but then that does make it more anxious in terms of how results will be collated. That's a brilliant example, actually, I hadn't picked up on, not in my particular spectrum. And you also see people there who maybe are spending more time with immediate family, but that puts pressures on the immediate family. Or you've got new technology, and yet we seem to get to a position where we get Zoom fatigue. And I don't know if you've seen this, but people are now reporting that they're absolutely shattered by the end of the day because they're using technology more than ever before. It's very hard to find respite from that. I then started thinking about whether this could be used for businesses, and I think it can. I think it's a distinct thing. I think it's related, but it's distinct for a business or an organisation entity, whether that might be a business or another organisation. You can go from the most negative aspects, which are closure, financial losses, job losses, furlough, staff engagement, suffering, to new technology, diversification, new business, new products, potentially even growth. And there are businesses that have grown in this period without doubt. And it's that most positive side of things to the most negative. You can be simultaneously at a number of those. You could be hemorrhaging money in the day-to-day, but diversifying and rolling out new products. It's not necessarily in a linear fashion. Secondly, then, so what does this mean? If we think about change as a spectrum rather than change as a curve, the second A is to accept the facts. Now, I'm lifting a little bit here from a brilliant book I read, which is called Will It Make the Boat Go Faster? Ben Hunt Davies, an Olympic rower, co-wrote this a few years ago, and it talks about the experiences of the Great British Rowing Team. And they said they only really broke through in terms of performance when you went from fact and having the best interpretation of that fact, because it impacts, importantly, your feelings, the actions, and the results you get. As an example of this, they kept losing to the Russians, but when they believed they could beat them, as opposed to saying, we're never going to win, the feelings was far more positive. The actions of making their own boat go faster, I'm doing the rowing motion now, they did more early morning practices, they got better results. And it's not a spoiler this time because it was 2000. They did win the gold. And I presented this to teams working with unemployed people who said, there aren't any jobs in Lincoln, or I'm not good enough. Now, if that is your belief, if you don't think you're good enough to get a job, how are you feeling every day? What actions are you taking when someone says, look for a job, and what results do you get? It's fairly clear to see there's a chain. And when I presented this to the teams at the time, we had health and wellbeing specialists said, oh, a lot of this chimes with cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which is a whole other subject. But there's something here about having the acceptance of where you are in life. It's not Mary Poppins land after all, but finding the best interpretation for the situation you're in. Look at this another way, and Kat, who's moderating in the background, very kindly shared this with me, and it's absolutely true. Stephen Covey, 7 Habits, Stephen Covey, talked about having circles of control. Now think about your change spectrum. There will be loads and loads of things you are concerned about. However, there's a smaller amount of things you can actually influence, and there's an even smaller amount of things you can control. Now, whether that's as a person, an individual, or a business leader, or a manager, you can't control everything. And it ties back to this idea of the second A. So after you've done your analysis, accept the facts, accept where you are, find the best interpretation. Just to illustrate this, you have a look through and you see on the change spectrum for a business, let's take out closure, the worry of closure. That may or may not happen. Financial losses you may have incurred. You may have had to furlough people. By starting to take out those things you can't directly influence or control or have passed and happened, you can then focus your attention more on those things that you can positively impact and hopefully make a move on. Now, that's not to say we know exactly where we're going to next, because we don't know what Boris Johnson and the government might announce next week, for example, but it does lend itself to the idea of having some thoughts around whether we are moving in a certain direction at a certain speed. And the final A I wanted to mention was adopting AI. Now, AI is, as I mentioned earlier, appreciative inquiry, and it's a management theory which looks at strengths, it looks at the positives. It's almost the opposite of problem solving. And why is that a good thing? Why not problem solve? Well, I love this cartoon. It really sums it up for me. Sometimes as a problem solver, you may have done a huge amount of work and you're looking at what you didn't do. What did you not pick up on? What did you actually miss? Whereas an asset-based and appreciative inquiry looks at what you've got. I saw this practically in action when I was working in prisons a few years ago before I joined university. And if you went into a prison and said, what are the problems in this prison? You'd have been there for a long time, whether that was talking to the governor, the staff, or the inmates, because people had very difficult situations to deal with. And businesses can have difficult situations too. We'll do it in a minute. However, if you went into that situation and said, okay, can you tell us about what's working well this week? You'd probably elicit some interesting feedback. Say, well, meal times have been on time. We haven't had lockdown this week, and that could be an absolute breakthrough at times. We have had good visits, resettlements going well. And all of a sudden, you've got a conversation. You've got a dialogue. You can connect with people, and people will be much more interested in joining that conversation. I think it's a really important point for us to all consider at the moment as being resilient individuals and resilient businesses, is that it can become all too an overwhelming feeling of it's also difficult, and what do you actually focus on? And if we can keep focused on the positives with appreciative inquiry, I think it's something which may well benefit all of us. So, in conclusion, some of the things that I just wanted to bring forward today, I think traditional change management isn't working, or it's certainly under stress because it's not been developed for a pandemic period in which we all find ourselves. Some things haven't changed. So there are several things: having your own strengths, your purpose, your traits, knowing what works in a volatile world hasn't changed. But what I hope we can introduce is an idea of a change spectrum, which will help businesses and people analyse where they are today and look to the future. I think ultimately, being a considerate and compassionate person as a leader, or just somebody who's going through this crazy situation together, is really important. It's never been as important, and will really help with people's resilience as we move through. And I'm picking up on Victoria Denea's comment on Facebook. Hi Vicky, hope you're well. We might be in different boats, but all in the same fleet. And she's put a question mark there. And I think that is a challenge, perhaps, as we all think about our own change spectrum, where we are as individuals and how other people might be thinking at the moment. It's really important that we recognise those differences. So that's the presentation. I hope you found that food for thought, which was part of the purpose for today. Maybe got some thoughts going. We'd love to connect with you further. I'd be very happy to take any questions or feedback. Thank you, Jacqueline, for your comment. Thank you, Urs, for your comment. There are loads and loads of thoughts which may spring out of this. I can feedback any questions now. But ultimately, if you think, do you know what, that's got me thinking for my business. If you've got me, if you're thinking this would be a good connection for further thinking or learning, drop me a line. At Hickerton on Twitter is me, or alternatively, mhickerton@lincoln.ac.uk. Drop me an email. I'd be delighted to speak to you. Many people have said they're really interested in learning through the university at the moment. Aside from everything else that's going on, it's a positive time for learning. If you're interested in learning MBA or work-based distance learning, again, drop me an email on the email address there. Would be delighted to connect. Thank you very much for listening today. I've not seen any more questions come through as yet, so we can leave it there and you can grab back some valuable time. But I hope it's been a signpost for a way for boosting resilience for individuals. And as individuals, we can boost resilience for the organisations and businesses of which we're part of. And ultimately, we hope that will then boost the resilience of Lincolnshire and beyond. So thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future. Thank you very much.